Hey everyone, today we're benchmarking the CPU from the first ever PC I built myself, the Athlon II X4 640, which released back on the 11th of May 2010. Join us after the intro to find out how it does today. Costing $122 on release, which is around $143 today as of the time of writing. The quad-core 3GHz Athlon II X4 640 was the CPU I bought for the first PC I built around a decade ago. It was based on the Crysis architecture, which is actually just the Deneb architecture used in the quad-core Phenom IIs with the L3 cache disabled. And looking at the specs, the 640 is identical to the C3 revision of the Phenom II X4 945 minus the L3 cache. And speaking of cache, the 640 has 128 kilobytes of L1 cache per core, alongside the L2 cache of 512 kilobytes per core as well. It will be quite interesting in the future to test the 640 alongside a Phenom II X4 chip at the same frequency to see what sort of difference that missing 6 megabytes of L3 cache would make. Other than that, the 640 also featured a Northbridge and Hypertransport link speed of 2 GHz. It also has DDR3 and DDR2 memory controllers. Cinebench R20 is first up. We run this benchmark 3 times and average out the scores to get a representation of what the CPU can reliably manage. The 640 at stock clocks managed a score of 597.67, 2.86% up on the Phenom II X3 710 with its 4th core unlocked. The 710 runs slower at 2.6 GHz, so would perform better if at the same clock speed, given that it has the full 6 megabytes of L3 cache available to it. You can see this just from how much better the overclocked and unlocked 710 performs at 844.67 points, 16.99% faster than the Athlon, despite the clock speed only being 100 MHz higher. 3.69 GHz was the most we could get out of the 640, while maintaining stability at safe voltage limits. Interestingly, the 640 only scores 2.46% higher than the i5 6200U in the Star Wars laptop we tested last time. Quite impressive from the i5 for only 5 years difference between these CPUs, and given that the i5 has 2 less cores. Blender is the newest benchmark in our CPU test suite, so we haven't many CPUs to compare it against yet. It is a tile-based renderer, splitting an image up into tiles and giving each thread of a CPU a tile to render. We run the benchmark 3 times, rendering a single frame each time, and average out the time in seconds it takes each test to complete. The 640 managed an average score of 140.2 seconds at stock in the fishy cat scene we're using, 10.93% up on the 6200U in the Star Wars laptop from last video. This is a 17 seconds difference, which may not seem much, but multiply that across the 100 frames this animation runs for, and you've got a near 3-minute difference in render time. You'll see a far larger difference in more complex animations. We saw a 24.36 second decrease in time to render from the 3.69 GHz overclock here, a decrease of 17.38%. And just for fun, this is also 141.69% slower than 4 GHz Ryzen 7 2700 we have in the GPU test bench / editing rig running the same benchmark. Moving on to the gaming benchmarks, and Crysis is first up. This is being run in 64-bit mode at 1080p medium settings with motion blur disabled, and with the default DirectX 10 mode enabled as well. It appeared to run quite well at first, but further into the test there were noticeable but brief stutters. Using the binoculars, for example, produced noticeable stuttering, and in the second half of the test, the latter few minutes especially, the micro stutter was quite noticeable. Object and texture popping was apparent throughout, more so in the latter few minutes again. It's not exactly a comfortable experience, but it's still playable to an extent. Stock clocks managed 53.4, 21.6 and 10.5 FPS, average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates respectively, which the chart shows as being noticeably worse in 1% and 0.1% lows compared to the Phenom II X3 710, despite running 600 MHz faster. Another indication of how much the lack of L3 cache is holding back the Athlon. Crysis, being from 2007, is obviously not able to take advantage of all 4 cores here, going by the similarity in performance between the locked and unlocked Phenom. The overclock improved the performance slightly, as the game ran a lot smoother but was still noticeably stuttery in the latter half of the test, as well as when using the binoculars, but the stuttering there was much better than it was at stock. It managed improvements in average, 1%, 0.1% lows of 14.42, 18.98 and 25.71% respectively, at 61.1, 25.7 and 13.2 FPS respectively. And despite averaging higher FPS than the stock Phenom, and being clocked a whole gigahertz higher, it technically performs worse due to more stuttering, which the 1% low indicates. The Athlon is really screaming out for that L3 cache here. Next up is GTA 5, a game which, unlike Crysis, is capable of using 4 cores. We're running this at 1080p with the lowest settings and 16x anisotropic filtering. Despite GTA 5's ability to use 4 cores, performance wasn't great. There was pretty bad stuttering throughout the city, despite the frame rate staying above the low 40s, showing just how inconsistent the frame times are. The game became smoother once out on the highway and was run quite well in the desert area, but that's not going to make up for the poor performance in the city, considering how major a part of the map it is. Stock clocks managed 54.4, 26.3 and 20.1 FPS, average 1% and 0.1% lows respectively. With the overclock, the frame times were still pretty inconsistent throughout the city, but it had improved a lot over what stock clocks could manage. Any stuttering on the highway was gone, and as at stock, the desert area is still smooth. It managed 22.98, 21.29 and 18.9% improvements over stock's average 1% and 0.1% lows respectively. Rise of the Tomb Raider is next, and is being run at 1080p with the lowest settings and 16x anisotropic filtering. The game actually ran fine to start with only one noticeable stutter in the first couple minutes of the test, but the problems became quite noticeable from then onwards. There was severe stuttering at points throughout, and in the Soviet installation there were issues with at least one of the side quests, in that you weren't even given the option to accept it. Fortunately, none of the scripted sequences we came across failed to start, as is common with underpowered CPUs in this game. Stock clocks managed average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates, 57.1, 17.5 and 9.8 FPS respectively, with the 1% and 0.1% lows showing just how bad the stutter was at points. The overclock made a pretty decent improvement to performance, with the stuttering massively reduced, but it could still be pretty significant at points. There was also a weird issue in which Lara's hair kept bouncing around, even when she was standing completely still, something we didn't see at stock. There was also noticeable but brief stutters throughout the copper mill. However, the side quest we had issues with in the Soviet installation was now completely fine. The benchmark showed just how significant the improvement was: 14.54, 29.71 and 34.69% improvements to average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates respectively. And overall, the game is now both playable and enjoyable despite the remaining issues. And lastly, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is up, which we're running at 1080p with the lowest settings possible. And to our surprise, it performed great. There was some noticeable stuttering on occasion and some brief hitches elsewhere, but overall the game actually performed fantastically. There were, however, some weird texture issues, in which some NPCs wouldn't have the top half of their bodies, for example, and another where the textures on an NPC glitched out massively and they covered a vast majority of the screen. Nothing affecting gameplay though, so that's not really something to worry about. The stock clocks managed 85, 31 and 14.3 FPS, for its average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates respectively. The overclock made a massive improvement to the benchmark figures, with improvements of 11.53 and 36.36% to average and 0.1% lows respectively. The lower 1% figure though was affected by being in loading screens, as Benchy isn't the best at this game, so kept dying a few times, didn't he? Performance was great though, and other than some minor micro stuttering, which wasn't particularly noticeable anyway, there were no other issues. Even the really glitchy textures were gone too. Moving on to power draw, and we get to see just how inefficient the 640 becomes once overclocked. At stock, the Athlon pulls 58.73 watts down the CPU power cable, plus or minus 3%, putting it almost equal to the stock Phenom II X4 710 with its 4th core unlocked. And this shoots up to 91.71 watts, plus or minus 3%, with the 3.69 GHz overclock, which needed nearly 1.5 volts to be stable. This may not seem like much of an increase in power draw, looking at the numbers, but that equates to a jump in power draw of nearly 70% for only a 20.4% increase in score over what stock clocks managed. Blender was another benchmark that showed the Athlon's inefficiency once overclocked. Power draw is at 59.95 watts, plus or minus 3% for stock clocks, and with the 3.69 GHz overclock, we saw a 73.43% increase in power draw to 103.97 watts, plus or minus 3%. And that's for even less of an increase in score than in Cinebench, at only 17.38% less time to render than stock managed. And finishing off with idle power draw, we saw 14.47 watts, plus or minus 3% down the 12V CPU power cable, which, interestingly, is 34.26% less power than what the stock 2.6 GHz Phenom II X4 710 pulls, with one less core than the 3 GHz stock 640. The overclock pushes the 640 past the idle power draw of the 710 with its unlocked fourth core, at 23.47 watts, versus the 710's 22.25 watts. And this is with the Phenom more than 1 GHz slower than the Athlon II X4 640. This whole thing goes to show though that the Athlon, despite its inefficiency once overclocked, is still far more efficient than an overclocked Phenom II. To conclude, it was personally quite interesting testing the Athlon II X4 640, because as mentioned earlier, it was the CPU I bought to go into the first PC I ever built, so it kicked off a big hobby for me, and ever since then, I've built every PC I've had. Performance-wise though, as you saw, it did struggle in some newer titles such as GTA 5 and Rise of the Tomb Raider, which shows just how much games have progressed over the 5 to 6 years since the 640 was released. And Crysis as well, compared to the Phenom II X4 710, showing just how much that missing L3 cache affects it. At the time, the 640 was a big upgrade for me because it replaced the Core 2 Duo E6750 I had in the pre-built PC I had prior to this. That very same 6750 was benchmarked on the channel quite a while ago now, but there will be a link somewhere up there in the corner. The biggest surprise though was the Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which performs surprisingly well, and is quite playable and enjoyable. True testament to just how well CG Projekt Red did with the game. We were a bit disappointed we couldn't get more than the 3.69 GHz we managed on the overclock, but saying that, if the 640 could have overclocked higher, there's no reason AMD would have cut it down from the Phenom II X4 945 that it originally was. And before we finish up today, we'd like to give shout-outs to Patreon supporters TazFaeDodge, ShadowInTheVoid and Peter for helping to make all of this possible. So if you enjoyed the video, leave a comment and a like, and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more content like this. And don't forget to share the video as well. And you can support us in creating these videos through our Patreon at patreon.com/BenchyTests, or through Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/BenchyTests. And remember, Ko-fi has a hyphen between the KO and FI. And if you do decide to become a patron, you'll gain early access to all of our videos before the public do, or as long as you remain a patron. So, thanks again for watching. We really appreciate you taking the time to watch our content. Hopefully we'll see you next time.